The issue is not the other individual. God doesn't want me to forgive them for them. He wants me to forgive them for me. And then the other thing that God kind of gave me a picture of, he said, hey, if I can forgive you for the stupid stuff you've done, nothing, the stuff your mom and dad did doesn't compare to what you did. And so God just transacted that in my heart and transacted with my mom and dad, and it transformed our relationship. So now fast forward a couple more years, and all these people are saying some really cool things about me and my wife, and I'm going, holy smokes, they're talking about me, they're talking about me. And, I'm thinking, let this go on forever. This is really good. And but it had to stop, and my mom was the last person to stand up. And picture this, a mom with her first child getting married, whom hated her for years, yelled at him, did all the crazy, stupid stuff that a young kid would yell. And she looks up, and she just looks at the room, and she says, I want to thank all of you for doing in my son's life what his parents failed to do. And I got alone with her a little bit later. And she's absolutely right. There were many men in that room that God had used in my life. But I looked, I said, Mom, you got it close. God used those men. But God did it in my life. God changed me. And it's a real deal. Now, the biggest problem I had is when I became a Christian, I beat the living daylights out of anything that was moving with Christianity. Because I discovered the cure to cancer. So I completely abused every relationship that I had. I cut off all relationship with my parents because everybody needed Jesus. Because I got Jesus, you need it too. And so one of the things that God did in my walk, that He's given me a passion, is I recognize that I'm a rare bird, unfortunately. Look at this room. 20 people maybe grew up in an agnostic, non-religious, non-church-going family home. I'm the product out there you're looking for. I'm the prospect. I'm the customer you're trying to find. I get it. And I lost it for a while or never got it, but then some people really began to invest in my life and share with me principles that profoundly changed the way that I really view evangelism. And the more I grow in this area, the more and more I'm convinced it's the lost art of evangelism that most of us in this room don't grasp. And one of the things that I have found is that if I were to ask you guys for a gut-level definition of evangelism, or actually the first question would be gut-level definition, most of you would have some definition tied to closing the deal. It's about a person converting to Christ. It's an evangelistic event. What's the first thought we have? People's going to get saved. A card's going to be checked. There's some aspect of that. And I am convinced in my heart of hearts that that is one of the fundamental reasons that people don't engage in evangelism, is because they have the wrong view of it. Okay? By the way, none of those events are bad. They're just part of it. And that's what I want to really speak to you with. But one thing I want to talk to you about first is why evangelize. I think that's a second issue that I'm convinced of in the heart of hearts, is that why people do not get engaged with those that don't know Christ. One clear reason, which should be good enough for me, but it's not, is God commands it. I don't know about you guys, but I find that just pure obedience to God, I kind of struggle with. I need to have something in it for me. So then another school of thought, which is also valid, is that look at all He's done in your life, Edmondson. How could you not go out and invest in the lives of people? And that is absolutely a great reason. There's a third one. The love of God compels us, as the Scriptures tells us. No question. These are all good. I'm convinced, though, they will never sustain us over the long haul. The story of a converted adult Christian is one of great energy and great fervor when they get saved. And then over about a 3 to 5 year period, they die out. They flame out like something hitting the atmosphere and just flaming out. Why is that? Why is that? I think it's a church at Ephesus that in Revelation, John says, you've lost your first love. People lose their first love, and I'm convinced, and my kids, by the way, are going to struggle with this, that people that grow up in Christian homes, they may never have found it. They're Christians, but they've not really found their first love. So I'm going to give you a principle that I've got from Oswald Chambers, and I'm not going to do the whole principle. It's really good. You ought to read it sometime. But Oswald, you guys know Oswald does a diary, what's it, Utmost for My Highest, is that right? Utmost for His Highest. But in there he does a daily devotional, and it's one of the things that profoundly, he talks about the Dead Sea. Everybody knows the Dead Sea is one of the most dead bodies of water on the planet. Does everybody know why? There's no outlet. God gives us His Spirit. He converts us for the purpose of His living water. The issue is most of us are Christian Dead Seas. We're consumers. We receive. We receive. And in fact, this talk, hopefully, you'll receive. Right? Hopefully there'll be something neat and useful in it. You'll receive. Here's the problem. Where's it flowing to? And I'm not talking about the Sunday school class. I'm talking about real spiritual transformation. 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore you're no longer in Christ, but you're a new creature. Where are we involved in the lives of people? We're making new creatures. Recently I was in the same retreat weekend. A buddy of mine, Jeff Smith. Jeff is a friend of mine that I got to know, and I'm scared to death. But over breakfast I said, Jeff, we've known each other for a long time. Are you willing to study the Bible with me? He said, I've been hoping you'd ask. So long story short, over a couple of year period, God used me to allow Jeff to come to Christ. A couple year period, 4 years of him searching already, 6 years, he comes to faith. I'm on a retreat weekend a few months ago, and he stands up in front of a room similar to this, like this as well, and he says, I just want to tell you how God used Dave in my life and changed me. It was like I was listening to the guy talk about the drug. When we're involved in people's lives, it's a drug. And I have no issue looking at God and said, thank you for letting me take some of the drug. Paul in Thessalonians says, who's he talking about? Arguably the church that got it the best. So much so that their faith resounded everywhere. He looks at the Thessalonians and he says, you are my crown, you are my joy. Paul got it. Paul got it. In fact, he got it so much that he said, I'm willing to give up all of eternity for the sake of the Jew. He said, I'd be willing to give up my own salvation, God, if the Jews could come to Christ. Paul's heart. Listen to his heart. And then later on he says, I become all things, to the Jew become the Jew, Gentile become the Gentile. By some, I became all things to all men, that I might save some. So that is what I'm convinced is the most important heartbeat that all of us must get a hold of. I am convinced that most people will do it out of obedience for a while. They'll do it out of what God did in their life for a while. But unless they get in the game, unless you get in the game with people that don't know Christ, and you're part of that process of seeing people come to Christ, I am convinced we will all become old, Dead Sea Christians. We'll take all this input, and we won't go anywhere. Now here's the problem. You'll hear that talk, you go, oh, that's not maybe right. But it sucks that he's right. Because now you got a problem. I need to get involved in evangelism. And then your view of evangelism, that's what explodes next. Is because now you're thinking, oh man, I got to go to a door and knock and ask me for spiritual laws and close the deal. Holy smokes, I can't do it. Oh man, I don't know that. So I'll tell you the story about Stan. I became a Christian. I was barely a Christian. I was barely not suicidal for several years. God just took a while to kind of wrestle a lot of demons out of my life. But I worked for this man who was an unbeliever. And I actually called him to try not to find the time frame. But I spent a lot of years with this guy, and I just shared my real life. I don't know about this Jesus stuff. It doesn't seem to be working, but I got nowhere else to go. That was the way I lived my life in front of this man. I lived where God had me. And I just shared, real deal. Here's what's going on. So long story short, over a period of 1993, over 6 years, I knew him. 4 years, I worked for him. We're in Chinatown, San Francisco. He's buzzed. I don't think I was, but may have been a little. And he had come to one of my testimonies where I talked about more than a carpenter. He's a hair more than buzzed, to be honest with you. And he comes up to me and he goes, Dave, and we're walking in Chinatown, come back from a Chinese restaurant in San Francisco. He says, you know, I bought that book. I'm like, what book are you talking about? More Than a Carpenter. Really? What happened? He said, I believe it all. I said, okay. What else? And then God gave me a great question that Stan to this day says was transforming for him. And it was a God thing. I said, you know, the Bible says even the demons believe. What's the difference between your belief and theirs? And God used that to wrestle him over a 6-year period where he came to faith. And this Christmas, he and his wife, by the way, his wife came to faith later. He and his wife are going to share their testimony as a couple at an outreach event about what God did in their life. And I'm going to have the privilege of knowing, whether my name gets mentioned or not, that God allowed me to participate a little bit. It's the Super Bowl of life. I don't even need to play. I just want to be on the bench in the Super Bowl of life. Then the other thing, rats. All right. I've only got a few minutes to finish up. I got another great story, but I'll leave that one for a minute. If everybody in the paper, in the table, there's a paper. And I will tell you this, that if you guys could wrestle with the content of this paper for the rest of your life, it will be a mind that will never, ever be fully mined. Okay? And this is something I stole from another ministry. But this is the principles and it was in a teaching called Lifestyle Evangelism or Living Proof Evangelism. The most important thing about evangelism that I am convinced all of us need to know, it is not an event, it's a process. And if you look at this chart talks about the process. And I'm going to start at the bottom right. A guy like Dave Edmondson was going my own way until age 20s. And suddenly people came into my life. And I can tell you, I can look back now and go, there was Beth Newton, there was my crazy Aunt Edna, there was all these people over the course of my life that I'd be aware, I'd like them, but then they got this Jesus freak stuff going on. Couldn't deal with them. But over time, I got to the point that there may be some veracity here. And then God, an analogy I use is everybody comes to Jesus down and out, or up and out. But either way, you're out. You know, I used to say that Christianity is for people that need crutches, and I'm right. We do need a crutch. He is critical for us. We have to get to a place that we're not willing to be dependent on ourselves, but dependent upon Him. That requires me to be weak. All right, but this process, okay? Now, what happens is a person goes through this process. The first part of this process is cultivation. It is the most misunderstood principle in evangelism. Cultivation speaks to the heart through relationship. I don't care. I have talked to many, many adult converts. I've had a room full of people that when I said how many are adult converts, 100% of the room raised their hand. All of them have a story of God using people, and usually it's many people over a long period of time to reach people for Christ over a period of time. It's cultivation. The only thing I don't like about this chart is it should be 100 feet long, with most of it being cultivation. Right? The key is investing. So I play golf with unbelievers on Sunday morning sometimes. Don't tell my pastor. Right? But I do it. Why do I do it? Because I'm cultivating relationships.